So we've been talking about the Nephilim and the Rephaim and the demons and the beings that we've been talking about. They all promise great power. Now they deliver on that promise, but things are much deeper and more important than simple power. Government leaders are communicating with these beings, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. Our churches are teaching things that hide what's going on, or sometimes they even condone what is going on. These things would be what we call doctrines of demons. Some doctrines of demons simply waters down the message in order to keep people within the church ignorant. Others teach them to actively participate in the evil. Now, our world is full of these spiritual forces, including things like voodoo, witchcraft, Satanism, sorcery. Sorcery in the Bible is from the word pharmakia, from which we get the word pharmacy. It involves drug use, and this is not drug use as in medical drugs, but drugs as in mind altering drugs. Although sometimes medical drugs may be involved in some of these cases. That's another discussion for a different day. But our secular culture and our church culture both filter out much of what is evil. They forget about it. The world forgets, if it ever knew, that Karl Marx was an active Satanist. We see modern communism through the world destroying lives and persecuting the church, and its roots are in Satanism, yet we fail to confront it. The cities are full of evil, and it's getting worse. The American government, through the CIA, has summoned demons by their own admission. It's not hearsay, they admit it. And our society has no moral foundation, and there is no longer any discernment between good and evil. Evil is called good, and good is called evil, which is common in the Bible. Um, so this says first we overlook evil, then we permit evil, then we legalize evil, then we promote evil, then we celebrate evil, then we persecute those who still call it evil. They try to change things. They want to do things that please themselves. Now, I've stated before that Satan has no time for you personally. He has no time for me personally. There's a joke from back in the 60s and 70s from Flip Wilson that said, "The devil made me do it." I highly doubt that because you're probably not important enough to grab his personal attention. Unlike our Heavenly Father, Satan is not omnipotent, nor is he omnipresent. However, he has many beings working for him. Some are fallen angels, others are the demons and Rephaim. And unlike the images that are presented in many movies, they don't need to possess everyone. They just need to possess a few key figures. If 1/10 of 1% of a population has demonic influence to wreak havoc, it can be a problem for that society. Although I do have a feeling that that percentage is much higher than that, but it doesn't take more than that. If somebody wants political power, if somebody wants great wealth, if they want the great influence or a combination of these three, and they accept this demonic influence in their lives, then they can literally affect millions of other lives sometimes. Now, if you don't realize that we're at war, you're going to lose that war by default. This is a war that was started back in Genesis 3:15 between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. As believers, we have the obligation to be aware of these things and to fight against evil. Now, evil is oppression. We as believers, we're not organized, but the enemy is very organized. However, even whether we're organized or not, you still need to do your part in this war. So, this brings us to the continuation of the narrative that runs throughout the Bible, in which we're looking at the origins of these beings and how they got to where they are. Now, we must know our enemy if we are to successfully fight our enemy. That's just a simple rule of warfare. You have to know your enemy. And all under the power of God in heaven, the one true God in heaven, that's how we fight. We are born into the family by believing on Jesus, but we're expected to be faithful and to do the work of the Father, and that includes fighting in this spiritual warfare. Now, as we go through these studies, I would encourage you to write down the passages that we look at briefly here, look at them later, study them, compare them in different translations side by side to get a full understanding of what's being said. Now, there is a duality of spirits in these beings, and there's a separation of these spirits at death. One is the spirit of the human, the other is the Rephaim spirit that the human has voluntarily taken on. And make no state about it, it is the individual's choice. It may not be, yes, I want to be demonized, but it may be, I want that new car that I can't afford, or I want that political office, or I want this job, or something like that. Now, duality itself is not really confusing. It's just something that many or even most believers are never exposed to in church anymore. Now, while churches are busy teaching all about the mansions and the streets of gold that are being handed out to everybody left and right, or sometimes the churches are openly teaching evil actions such as drag queen services, or sometimes things that are seemingly innocent, such as what TV show are you in the Bible? And yes, that's a real sermon series that I've seen recently uh, in another state. But most churches no longer teach the meat of the word. They get tied up in man-made doctrines. They get tied up in doctrines of demons in order to keep you weak and unprepared. But salvation is a duality. There's the salvation of the spirit, and there's the salvation of the soul. And we'll have a video of that on our YouTube channel in the near future. Right now, it's not there, but we'll put it there. But simply put, you're saved spiritually by belief as an event. But you're saved with your soul, you're saved solically, if that's a word, by works. The soul and the spirit is one of the most important dualisms in the Bible, but there are many others. And often the answer to an either or question is actually both. But there's a separation of these dual spirits upon the death of the human body. And that's why the Bible can say that the departed spirits are both in Sheol, as the spirits of the dead men and kings, but they're also roaming the earth as demons. That ghost of Aunt Sally, that's not Aunt Sally. So just so you can understand this, we're going to look at some verses that use this terminology and how these verses fit together and how they're not contradictory, even though they seem to be contradictory. We're going to start in Job chapter 26, verses 5 through 6. And this says, dead things. This is the word Rephaim. The Rephaim, the dead things, were formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell, which is Sheol, is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. Then Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 10 through 11. The Emims dwelt therein in times past, a people great and many and tall, and the Anakims, which also were accounted giants or accounted Rephaim, as the Anakims, but the Moabites call them Emims. Deuteronomy 32:17. They sacrificed unto devils, and this is the word Shaddim, this is demons in the Septuagint, but they sacrifice unto these Shaddim, not to God, but to gods, to Elohim, whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. They're sacrificing to false gods, and false God doesn't mean they don't exist. It means they're not the true God. Proverbs 9:18, but he knoweth not that the dead or the Rephaim are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. And then Isaiah chapter 14, hell or Sheol from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead, it stirreth up the Rephaim for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. All they shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? So this is referring to the former leaders of the earth. They're now dead. Before they died, they were leaders of the earth. And if you have any doubt about who is running this current age, watch our lessons on Ephesians 6:12. Satan is the god of this age. And this is why believers need to pay attention to world politics and not ignore them. We're commanded to watch what these things are doing. Psalm chapter 106, verses 36 through 38. And they served their idols, which were a snare to them. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils, unto Shaddim, unto demons. And they shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. What does that sound like? I once saw a movie clip in which a representative of Satan got angry at a Satan worshiper for sacrificing children because he said, they're lost to us because they're innocent. We can't have them. However, if you think about it, child sacrifice, whether to a physical idol or simply as a matter of convenience like we do today, it does destroy the individual who's involved, and it destroys the society that condones it. First Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with demons. And unless you think that this is some distant in the past problem, it is brought to us in the present. Watch for sacrifices. Who makes these sacrifices? To whom are these sacrifices made? Those are the dark powers of this world. Now, demons, if you study the Bible, they're transgender. The oldest parade in the world that we have on record is in honor of the goddess Inanna or Astarte or Diana, depends on which society you're talking about. It's the same goddess, different names. But she was the goddess who could make men into women and women into men. The priests were all men pretending to be women, and they marched at the front of the parade carrying scalpels. And do you know what else they carried in that parade? They carried rainbows. Demons have hijacked God's rainbow, and they use it to try to give themselves the appearance of power and legitimacy. They demand tolerance, but they themselves are intolerant. Men into women and women into men. That's what these things do. That's evil. These problems are not in the distant past. These problems are today, and sacrificing our children to these demons. They inhabit the earth and they inhabit Sheol, both. It's not one or the other. And there's a duality. It's not that hard to understand. They can be in both places. And these different meanings come together, and they're not contradictory as long as you keep it in your mind that there's a dual spirit that is empowering these people. Now, in the verses we just read, notice that there's a connection that is made to royalty in those verses. Now, while this connection still exists, in the past, it is something that the hearers of what's being said would have been expected to be aware of. We see some of the kings of the Anakim, which seems to have been carried over from the sea people, from whom came the Capharim, the Amim, and the Philistines, who are all in the Bible. Now, the sea people are mentioned in the Bible, not by name. That's a historical group. They were a confederacy of seafaring nations that attacked ancient Egypt, and they attacked other Mediterranean nations. And eventually they brought about the destruction of the late Bronze Age sometime between the 12th and 9th century BC. They sailed in the Mediterranean, and they also sailed in the Red Sea. They burned down Ugarit, and Ramses II declared war on them, eventually defeating them. And then he exiled them to places with no ports from which they could sail. In other words, he didn't kill them, but he made them live in landlocked areas because their power was on the sea. Hiram of Tyre in the book of First Kings was a king of one of the sea peoples, and he allied himself with Solomon. The Philistines were also one of the sea peoples, and they worshiped Dagon, the fish god. In 1 Samuel, you can read about how God showed them who was really boss. Basically, they got their God in there, and they came in, they found the God with his arms and legs cut off. Now, one of the things that is interesting is that some of the imagery of these sea people, they've carried over into the modern church because the modern church wanted to appeal to these people. So they brought in their imagery. And you can see here the headdress for the priests of Dagon, the fish god, is just like the mitre of the bishops in the Catholic Church. They wanted these sea people to join their church. So, hey, we'll wear a hat like yours. Just come on in. We're all good here. The prophet Zephaniah makes prophecies about the sea peoples. The Jerusalem Bible says, woe to the members of the Confederacy in the sea. So they are mentioned. It's just they would have known who the sea people were without calling them the sea people. 3,000 years later, we have to know who they're talking about here. But in the Bible, these people are called sons of Anak. Anak is not just a name, but it's also a title. It's from the Greek and it means king. And this is one of the titles of Apollo, who had a temple in Athens that was dedicated to the worship of the Anakes protector. These are gods that sound a lot like the Mesopotamian Kalu. The description of them and their name is very similar. Now, the Bible tells us that the sons of Anak were descended from a man named Arba, who was the father of Anak. The city of Kiriath Arba means city of the tree, which later became Hebron in Israel. This was named after him. The name Arba comes from Arbion, which was a mountain on Crete, which had a temple to Zeus Arbios, which is god of the tree. We also have Arbor Day, Arboretum, things like that from this god, or from this mountain, actually, that means a tree. According to the Greek tradition, his ancestor was a giant. Imagine that. So, one thing that may be confusing is that the different descriptions of the Rephaim do not match. And that's because some of the Rephaim kings were physical embodiments for the demons or the Shadim, which were the territorial spirits, and they're referred to as demons. However, demons as a group covers more than one group of beings. So some demons roam the earth, while others, like the spirits of the fallen sons of God, they use the political rulers of the earth to influence the nations. In other words, this one group refers to more than one kind of being. And so, therefore, the descriptions don't always match because there's more than one description. Um, Now, these beings are no longer in control legitimately, but they have not yet been removed from power. That time is not yet. Now, there is a hierarchy here. The spirits of the fallen sons of God are embodied in the rulers, while the people who are in bondage to the culture and the religion of the state were engaged in necromantic practices that kept them under the bondage of the spirits of the Nephilim. There's a reason that nations, every nation in the world, eventually reverts to tyranny. There's a reason that the people become more and more wicked. The political system seeks to put the people in bondage, and the people will worship the god of state and the other gods that the state chooses in a culture of death and depravity. We see this process repeated throughout history, and most people are blind to it because most people don't know history. The mass of people, by far, they have their bread and circuses to keep them fed and entertained, and they don't care till it's too late. Then they care. And to paraphrase, those who do know history are doomed to repeat it because most people don't know history. Most people don't care to know history. They don't try. If it doesn't involve video games or sex or some kind of entertainment, most people simply don't care until it's too late. Now, the political rulers in this world are subject to the spirits of the fallen sons of God, and the people are subject to the demons. And that's who Jesus concentrated on while he was walking on this earth, the people. However, he did not ignore the politics, contrary to what most people within the church seem to think. Most people don't actively set out to be evil. They don't wake up one day and say, "Hey, I want to be evil." But they're simply deceived. In the past, they were deceived into thinking that they were simply honoring their ancestors. There's nothing wrong with honoring your ancestors in itself. However, what they were actually doing was honoring the lesser gods because of the way they did it. They were trying to bring their spirits back. They were honoring false gods. So, in the secular literature, in the Ugaritic and the Canaanite tradition, they called the gods themselves Rephaim, which the Bible doesn't. The Bible calls these spirits Rephaim, but the secular world called them all Rephaim, including the high god. Now, this included Bel Hadu, Anat, and Astarte. Some of these gods, and perhaps all of them, are making a return to prominence today. So the usage of the word Rephaim shows us that they're spiritual entities of various ranks and that they are not human men. And this imagery is the same imagery as the Watchers in Daniel chapter 4, if you go back and read that. 2 Chronicles 16:12. It's kind of a confusing verse until you look into it. And Asa, in the 39th year of his reign, was diseased in his feet, until his disease was exceeding great. Yet in his disease he sought not the Lord, but to the physicians. So why is it important that Asa went to the doctors? Does God condemn going to the doctors? I mean, this man was lame, and the New Testament has some examples of being lame. For example, Acts 8:7. For unclean spirits, crying with loud voice, came out of many that were possessed with them, and many taken with palsies and that were lame were healed. So the departure of the unclean spirits is tied to the healing of the lame. However, Asa was not looking for God to heal him. He turned to the Canaanite religion. And this word that is translated as physicians is Rapha. The ancient world believed the Rephaim were able to bring healing and fertility. So what he was doing is he was turning to the pagan gods, the pagan Rephaim, to heal him. And many of the gods in all the different cultures of the world are gods of healing and fertility, and of course, war. So Asa sought the help of the Rapha, not just the doctor, not your friendly neighborhood general practitioner that's going to give you something for what ails you. That this was a pagan practice. Now, the true goal of demons is to draw worship away from Yahweh and to bring affliction to mankind. Within 2 years, Asa was dead. He failed the test and the kingship was taken away from him. And it's not simply tradition that the Rephaim were used as healers. The Septuagint uses it in that way as well. In Psalm 88, we saw that the Rephaim were the spirits of the dead that dwell in Sheol. In the Septuagint, it's shown that the dead can be brought back from Sheol. In Psalm 87:11, in the Septuagint, in the in the modern Bible is actually verse 10, but in the Septuagint this is verse 11, and this is the Lexham translation of the Septuagint. It says, "You do not do wondrous things for the dead." This is Muth. This is not Rephaim, but you do not do wondrous things for the dead ones, do you? Or will physicians, or will Rephaim rise up and give thanks to you? In Isaiah 26:14, the dead do not come back to life. The spirits of the dead, the spirits of the Rephaim, they do not rise. That's because you came in judgment and destroyed them. You wiped out all memory of them. So if you think back a couple of lessons, the Rephaim were also known as travelers. So the understanding was that they could travel, they could cross the boundaries, and therefore they could heal spiritual afflictions. In our modern world, we would do well to remember that some physical ailments are merely that. They're merely physical ailments, but others may be spiritual ailments. There's nothing inherently wrong with doctors, but they are for the physical needs. The Rephaim were being raised, and they could raise. They could blur the line between life and death, and only God has the authority to do that. They exceeded their authority, and they were judged for it. Now, the Amorites can be traced back to the descendants of Canaan, and Canaan was a descendant of Ham. This sounds complicated. It's a family history. You can write it down, you can chart it out, but this is all important. But being the descendant of Ham, this means that they were originally completely 100% pure human. However, it's also important to remember that the mere presence of giants in a clan doesn't mean that everybody in that group is giants. It just means that's who they're centered around. And it was the religious practice of certain Amorites that made them become the first of the various giant clans. To give a little bit of this genealogy, we're going to read some verses in Deuteronomy here. The Amims dwelt therein in times past, a people great and many and tall, as the Anakims, which also were accounted giants, or were accounted Rephaim, as the Anakims. But the Moabites called them Amims. The Horims also dwelt in Seir before time, but the children of Esau succeeded them when they had destroyed them from before them and dwelt in their stead, as Israel did under the land of his possession, which the Lord gave unto them. And when thou comest nigh over against the children of Ammon, distress them not, nor meddle with them, for I will not give thee the land of the children of Ammon any possession, because I have given it unto the children of Lot for possession. That also was accounted a land of giants, or Rephaim. Giants dwelt therein in old time, and the Ammonites called them Zanzumans, a people great and many, and tall as the Anakims. But the Lord destroyed them before them, and they succeeded them and dwelt in their stead. In other words, they did what they were supposed to do. And as he did to the children of Esau, which dwelt in Seir, when he destroyed the Horims from before them, and they succeeded them, and dwelt in their stead even unto this day. And the Avims, which dwelt in Hazarim, even unto Azah, the Caphtorims, which came forth out of Caphtor, destroyed them and dwelt in their stead. Lots of names. But these are all the clans of the Rephaim. They're all listed here. They were all giants, or they were all giant clans. There is nothing in the Bible that explicitly states the origins of these clans. Now, we can speculate from history and other places in the Bible, but this is done. The reason that there's no genealogy listed specifically is to show that the origins of these tribes is not due to biological descent. They weren't born this way. This indicates that the immortality of these spirits and the fact that they were placed in a specific area geographically, not descent. They became Nephilim. So, to explain what I mean here, all of these tribes were Rephaim. Where did the Horims originate? They're probably the ancient Hurrians or the Hivites. The Anakims have no lineage, but we have no further information. The Amims may be from the Hivites, but it's only because of a possible name association. We know nothing about the Avims. The Caphtorims are probably from Crete, but that is completely from secular sources. And the last of all, we have no information at all about the Zanzumims or the Zumims or the Zumims. Zuzims, I can't say that. Deuteronomy 32:8. This is out of the ESV. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. So these immortal beings had geographical territories. These tribes were tied to the land in their origins. And when the Israelites had to conquer Canaan, there were plenty of these tribes with these giants that had a dual human Nephilim nature. And how did this happen? Job 26:5 says that dead things, or Rephaim, are formed from under the waters and the inhabitants thereof. The King James Version added the word things in order to clarify the passage, but as often is the case, it muddied the waters. It is simply dead, the Rephaim. So the serpent in the garden originally got mankind to corrupt itself by instigating human sin. Man sinned. The devil didn't make him do it. He just kind of encouraged it a little bit. The sons of God corrupted mankind even further by producing the Nephilim. Neither of these were forced on mankind. Mankind voluntarily participated in these things. So these entities, except for a few who still roam freely, they're in chains of darkness under the waters. They're in Tartarus. They're in the abyss. They're in the abode of Leviathan. It's an unholy realm, and it's not merely a physical realm. Although it's described as being under the earth, you cannot literally dig a hole and find it. The fallen sons of God, they're not in a hole somewhere in the earth. They simply can no longer access our physical world physically. At one time they could, but that door has been closed. They were able to release the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim as well as influence human themselves, however. And this was done through necromancy using a priesthood that bound the dead spirits to human men. They became Nephilim, even though they weren't born that way. Now, we previously looked in Genesis 10, Isaiah 23, and Micah 5 at the name or the title Nimrod, and that it means the Assyrian. Ezekiel will use this to take Job's statement above and bring it into focus so that we can see it clearly. In Ezekiel chapter 31, verses 2 through 9, behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches and with a shadowing shroud, and of a high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great. The deep set him up on high with her rivers running around about his plants, and sent out her little rivers unto all the trees of the field. Therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long because of the multitude of waters when he shot forth. All the fowls of heaven made their nests in his boughs, and under his branches, and all the beasts of the field bring forth their young, and under his shadow dwelt all great nations. Thus was he fair in his greatness and the length of his branches, for his root was by great waters. The cedars in the garden of God could not hide him. The fir trees were not like his boughs, and the chestnut trees were not like his branches, nor any tree in the garden of God was like unto him in his beauty. I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of God envied him. So this passage here, this passage is comparing Pharaoh and the Egyptians to Nimrod and the Assyrians. This is an imagery that the modern church does not understand, but Pharaoh would have understood it. If not, this would have made no sense. It wouldn't have been said. This prophecy explains about the source of Nimrod's power and the supremacy of the Most High God. Throughout the Bible, trees are used to represent empires or governmental structures, such as the cedars of Lebanon and the oaks of Bashan, and this is a reference to Nimrod's dominion as a mighty king. In Amos chapter 2, verse 9, yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above and his roots from beneath. So this use of the cedar tree is a metaphor, and it's used in this passage to describe the Amorites. So trees are used to describe kings as part of the empire. They're the head of the empire. And the Rephaim were the prominent branches of this tree. The kings were not only metaphorically larger than their subjects, but they were physically larger as well. And you can see this not only in the Bible, but in art. And this great cosmic tree that we're given here in Ezekiel 31 ties together heaven, earth, and hell. That which is above, that which is on the earth, and that which is beneath. And this has a direct relationship to the Tower of Babel and other ziggurats from around the world, not just the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel specifically applies to the Israelites going into the land of Canaan, but these towers were around the world. But it represented a connecting point on earth between heaven and hell. And this is how Nimrod presented himself as the direct channel for man to access divine power. Nimrod, the Tower of Babel, and this cosmic tree are all one image. And you will find this same cosmic tree represented in Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar even claimed to have rebuilt the ziggurat and his temple, although we don't think he did. Now, when we see the image of a tree, we know that it's metaphorical because a literal tree did not rule over people, but this image is always used consistently. And we will find it used in the New Testament consistently with the Old Testament. And some of the imagery is the tree, which represents the ruler and the people under him, not the government structure itself, but the people in that structure. The height represents the authority. The larger the tree, the more the authority. The branches represent the different areas of authority. The shadows, the influence over the region. The fruit is the subjects of the kingdom. The roots represents its stability or lineage. How deep do those roots go? The water is a source of nourishment and strength. You have to have water to have a healthy tree. The birds are evil spirits, or those who are influenced by the evil spirits in the physical world. People often forget that in the New Testament. And then the beasts represent the evil spirits that are active in the physical realm, not in the heavens. So in the passage in Amos, the fruit is a reference to the Amorites. The roots are the connection with their spiritual origins. And the destruction of the fruit has been shown in the defeat of Pharaoh at the Exodus. It's been shown in the destruction of the cities of the plain in Genesis 19, and it's shown in Joshua's victories over the Amorite kings east of the Jordan and other events that are similar to that. So the destruction of the roots was the direct intervention by God at Babel. This prevented Nimrod's evil from spreading any further. Therefore, the iniquity of the Amorites is the consequence of their actions and how God was taking care of that problem. So, in concluding today's study, we need to do a brief summary of where we are so that we can move forward. The Rephaim tribes were giants that originated within groups of Amorite humans. The Amorites had taken on the demonic spirits out of the dead Nephilim. They became the walking dead, literally. These Rephaim became their tribal designation. And there were several Rephaim tribes under different names, and sometimes they fought against one another too. There are also certain areas that are named after the Rephaim. Bashan is the land of the Rephaim, and it can be translated literally as the hell of the dead. There's a valley in Israel known as the Valley of Rephaim, which is known as the Pit of Death. And in the King James Version, the term Rephaim is usually translated as giants, but as we saw, sometimes it's physicians, but we know that that's referring to these spiritual beings. So the individuals among the Rephaim were named after the spirits that were within them. And often those names are more titles or descriptors than actual names. And these are the same spirits that had walked the earth prior to the flood. These are the same spirits that walk the earth today. These are immortal spirits. They have to take on new human bodies, but they themselves continue on. The physical changes were due to the corruption and defilement of the human host. They take on a spirit being and they take on physical characteristics of that being. This was a leftover trait from the Nephilim. And if you look today, you can see physical changes in people who are demonized or demon possessed. They're more powerful, they're stronger, they're often larger, they do some seemingly impossible things. But there's a duality within a person who has taken one of these spirits. And sometimes the spirit is an influencer, and sometimes that spirit is in control. Sometimes you can see both spirits combined, and other times one is subverted to the other one. When the human dies, the human spirit goes to Sheol, goes to the world of the dead, but the Rephaim spirit is released back onto the earth, and they're referred to as unclean spirits and sometimes called demons. The Rephaim spirits are destructive of the host bodies. In other words, a demonized person is going to be self-destructive. Sometimes people are just simply self-destructive. Other times, these beings can make an otherwise healthy person become self-destructive. The Shadim, who were the Rephaim gods, they're territorial by nature. They stay in one place, and they would control worldly rulers within their spheres of influence. Some of the lower level demons would attach themselves to a person and will move about more freely. But the Shadim are associated with dead kings, and the living kings would connect to them through the occultic and necromantic ancestral worship. They were humans that would voluntarily take on these demonizations. Now, Rephaim gods are ranged in rank from minor to major deities in ancient religions. They're connected with the underworld by nature, and they're not confined to that world. They're active in this world today. Israelites always looked at Rephaim as unholy, evil, and unclean. The apostate Israelites would look to them as healers and sometimes go into complete worship of these beings. And this is a central theme in the Bible. Israelites didn't abandon worship of the Most High God in order to simply worship a block of wood or stone. They would worship the deities that were behind those blocks of wood and stone. And often these practices were exciting, and they were fun, and they were of a very vivid sexual nature. And so it would appeal to human nature, but would always bring about destruction. You get power in the short term, but destruction in the end. The Rephaim originated in the realm of the dead. They never go away. One day they will be destroyed, but then until then, they're going to torment mankind, and mankind is going to participate voluntarily. They're going to go head first. And these beings tend to congregate together. Proverbs 21:16, the man that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead, or will remain in the congregation of the Rephaim. There's always the idea of joining together as a congregation or an assembly. They're dead and they're joining. And this joining is a passive term. It doesn't mean that it's not voluntary. It's just you don't do it. They do it. You ask for it. The Rephaim are those who are joined or gathered, and it's a gathering together of the spirits of the dead, and it has to do with spiritual entities. The Rephaim were joined together with the Amorites. And how did they join? What spiritual beings were involved in this? Job chapter 30, verse 23. This is from the Brenton's translation of the Septuagint. It says, for I know that death, and this is Thanatos death, this is the death of the soul. For I know that death will destroy me. For the earth is the house for every mortal. And this house is the same word as appointed. For the earth is the appointed for the mortal. This is the Beth Moed. This is the house of the assembly. It's the house of the appointment. This is the domain of the death through which all mortals will one day pass unless the Lord returns before death. And the Hebrew term Noed does not simply refer to a certain place, but it refers to a set time. And in this case, it's the time of the human body in death. Hebrews 9:27. And as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this, the judgment. So the house of assembly is the gathering for the spirits of the dead. In Job chapter 26, verses 5 through 7, dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. This is another term to describe the same place from a different aspect. What lies beneath the waters? Who lives in the assembly of the dead? Now, if you're going to bear with me, I want us to look at one last thing, and this is what we're going to close with tonight because it's something I want you to think about. This will emphasize why we need to know history and why the future is simply history that has not yet been fulfilled. These demons are not a problem for the most part, or for the past. These demons are a problem for today also. And if we're faithful, we will be taken out of the world for the worst of it, but the Bible doesn't tell us when or how much we're going to have to go through before we're taken out. But we also need to warn the world. And more specifically, we need to warn those around us. We need to know history past in order to understand history future. We're going to read the same story in the different Gospels from different perspectives. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 8, verses 28 through 34. And let's talk about Jesus came across the sea to talk to this demon-possessed man. And when he was come to the other side of the country of the Gadarenes, there met him two possessed with devils coming out of the tombs, exceeding fierce, so that no man might pass by that way. And behold, they cried out, saying, what have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? Art thou come hither to torment us before the time? And there was a good way off from them a herd of many swine feeding. So the devils besought him, saying, if thou cast us out, suffer us to go away into the herd of swine. And he said unto them, go. And when they were come out, they went into the herd of swine, and behold, the whole herd of swine ran violently down a steep place into the sea and perished in the waters. And they that kept them fled and went their ways to the city and told them everything and what was befallen to the possessed of the devils. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they besought him that he would depart out of their coasts. Jesus took care of these two demonized guys, and they said, you go now. So just as in the story of the birth of Jesus, the shepherds were watching their flocks by night, they were raising the sheep for sacrifices. These people raising the swine, they were doing the same thing. Swine were used for sacrifice and pagan rituals, and they weren't happy with what Jesus had done. They had no problem with the guys or the demons, but their sacrifice had been destroyed. Then in Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 4, and they came over unto the other side of the sea, unto the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs. And no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. Then in Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 27, and they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against Galilee. And when he went forth to land, there met him out of the city a certain man, which had devils long time, and wore no clothes, neither abode in any house, but in the tombs. And you may ask me, brother, what does that have to do with history? When you study the history of this story, you realize it is not random chance that Jesus hopped on a boat seemingly to minister to just this one man or these two men. Sometimes that one person may be who you're to minister to, but there's more to the story. This city is in an area that was taken over by the soldiers of Herod. They were wicked, and they were cruel, and they were extremely militantly homosexual. They would rape people. They would beat people. They would kill people. They were so oppressive that the people sent a delegation to Rome to plead for help, and they were told those aren't Roman troops and they're not our responsibility. And so those people went home, and most of the city committed mass suicide. And that's what these tombs were, where the people had all killed themselves, but the demons were there. What happens to the demons when the people die? The demons try to find another body. Apparently, that's what happened with this demonized man. Some of them were probably still roaming around. But this entire area was full of pagan demonic activity. But with fewer and fewer people, these demons being territorial, they had nowhere to go. I look around the world today and I see the same thing happening. Therefore, we need to know the past to understand the present. When we compare these accounts, there are some differences, obvious differences. Luke says that the demoniac comes from the city, but Mark says he comes from the tombs. It's not the same place. One is possessed for a long time, but Mark doesn't tell us how long. Matthew says there were two men possessed with demons who came out of the tombs to meet Jesus. Well, Mark wrote his gospel like a shooting script for a movie. He got right down to the action. Excuse me. Luke, who was writing 20 years later and was interviewing witnesses, tells us of the other man. Mark tells us of the one guy. Mark talks about the other one. The other one's there. They're just focusing on the one. Both of these men were in bad shape. We don't know what category of demons these were, but I would suspect they're the lowest caste because they don't seem to be doing anything important other than tormenting these two guys. There's a common belief in the world today that Satan is in charge of hell and all the demons are there, but that's just a comic book view and it's not based in reality. The demons during the days of Jesus walked the earth. They wanted to occupy the bodies of men and women. There are demons today, and that is still their greatest desire. They're walking the earth, and they want to put on a body. They want to put on clothes, so to speak, the body, because they've destroyed theirs. Mark tells us that the man is inhabited by legion. That means he has 6,000 demons. One person has 6,000 demons. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, out of the Geneva Bible, to bring this back to your mind. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and against the worldly governors, the princes of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness which are in the high places, and against in the heavenly places. These demons still affect the world today. These creatures have not dominated the world landscape in the recent past, but that's changing. Prior to the Lord's return, they're going to be teaching doctrines of demons, and the local church assemblies are going to be teaching the doctrines of demons from the pulpit. Men and women are going to worship these demons. We see that in the world today. It's blatant. It's out in the open. Although most people, even those not within the church, will not admit that they're worshiping demons. Some say they're worshiping Mother Earth. Others say they're worshiping gods, or they're worshiping angels, or they're worshiping animals, or they're worshiping the government. One doctrine that they're going to teach is to not eat meat. There are other doctrines, but there are always good reasons for these teachings. Tolerance, save the planet, things like that. There's some indication that there are now environmental factors that have been created that are literally turning men into effeminate mockeries of men. That's another discussion for a later time, but they have created an environment that makes us even more so. They're creating machines to do this. They're doing things through science to make these things happen. But these demons always recognize Jesus, and they know that he's the Son of God. They torment others, but they adjure him to not torment them before the time. These demons actually use God as the authority to not be tormented. How do they get away with that? Because they know the Word of God. They know the Word of God better than most people, better than most churches. Most churches provide entertainment, but these demons take the Word of God seriously. There's a time when these demons are going to be judged, and until then, his schedule is not going to change. These demons know the sentence, and they can claim the authority of God to not be judged before that time. 2 Peter 2:4, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus and delivered them in the chains of darkness to be reserved in the judgment. In Jude verse 6, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, under the judgment of the great day. They're judged for judgment of the great day. That day's not yet. There's a special time for that judgment, and that time was not while Jesus was walking on the earth. Some of these beings are free to roam the earth. They're doing Satan's bidding. Some of them, they're locked away, but their spirits are still free to influence men. And as we shall see, some of them are held at the bottom of rivers. There's an unseen danger here, and this danger affects the minds of hearts and men. For the sons of God that fell, there's no redemption. The redemption is not for spirit beings, although it's my opinion. And I promise you from the beginning, if I give you my opinion, I'm going to tell you what it is. There's not the Bible, but it's my opinion. But this is based upon the evidence that the hybrid humans, since they're part human, they can go either way. They can go redemption or they can go demons. But these pure spirit beings, there's no redemption for them. The shed blood of Jesus was shed for men and was not shed for angels. And God will judge the angels one day for their influence of others. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unjust and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints shall judge the world? And if the world shall be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Know you not that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? If then you have judgment of things pertaining to this life, set them to judge who are least esteemed in the church. Saints are going to be involved in this judgment. Not all believers. Not all believers are saints. Saints are those who have visible outworking of faith. Right now, the angels are far superior even to the saints. Now, while angels are not all powerful, they can do some mighty works, including controlling the minds of men and including getting men to teach false doctrines. And one day the saints will participate in the judgment of fallen angels. When God judges men, it is not to judge their status. He knows who is in his family and who is not. But he judges their works. And he's going to judge their works good or bad. And it's the same when the saints judge the fallen angels. We know they're angels. We know they're fallen. However, they were commanded to teach the nation about the things of God. Their judgment, like ours, is based upon their works. How do they influence people? Their punishment or reward will fit perfectly. Most churches fail to teach what the Bible says about different degrees of reward and different degrees of punishment. This demonized man in the above passage was supernaturally able to do things that he would not naturally be capable of doing. He breaks the chains to pieces. No one can subdue him as he cries day and night and cuts himself with stones. And this type of behavior is still observed in that area today. If you go there today, you will see the same behavior, but today, the nearby settlement is Muslim. This man is continuously in the mountains and tombs without sleep or rest. Demons don't occupy space as we think of it in our three-dimensional world. Many demons may enter one man, giving him great power. The angels know who Jesus is, but they also know the time of judgment. They desire water. They're in a place of torment. They want to leave the man to possess the swine. And Jesus lets them do it, and they drive into the sea and drown. Angels speak and hear. Stone and wood idols are physical embodiments for demons. The wood and stone doesn't hear, but the demons do. Today, there's a fascination with necromancy around the world. They want to have seances. They want to communicate with the dead. That way is death. Mark chapter 5, verse 15, and this is going to be our last verse. And they come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the devil and had the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those in the area told Jesus to leave. And just like today, when Jesus is presented, prophets is more important than people. This is even true within the visible church. They want their seats in the pew and then not offend you because they want the money. They don't want Jesus. This action by Jesus was also prophetic for today. Because today, when men are shown Jesus in the simplicity of the gospel, they will choose prophets over the person of Jesus. Jesus will free anybody who trusts him. They may not be free from persecution in this world, but they'll be without fear. They're truly free. In the world, demonic powers rule. Satan is the god of this age. And who will you choose? Who are you going to serve? Not everybody's an evangelist. Some are. If you're an evangelist, go seek out the unsaved. For the rest, we have a command to teach the truth and to serve the brethren. And this is a hard truth that people don't want to hear. And today, you have the ability to choose who you will serve. You have to spread the word.